Before we go into any techniques, maybe it's nice to have some mindset on how important it is to get your application work with web accessibility features. And I think, well, one of the most recognized problems on web accessibility is people who have a poor sight and have problems to look at the screen and look at the font sizes or read the screen, or maybe are actually blind. And that's almost 2.3% of the US population. That's quite a lot of people. Well, they actually do have some difficulties with using the mouse. They do have problems if they don't have a mouse and they need to work with the keyboard and the application is not really supporting the keyboard. It's really getting to start annoying to work with those web applications. Well, another group of the people who are depending on web accessibility are people with physical impairment, and that's about 7% of the US population. I think that's also quite a big group of people who we would exclude from the application if we wouldn't keep web accessibility in mind during our software development. Hearing impairment, that's about 16.8% of the US population. I think it's an ongoing group of people. It will be bigger and bigger. And I don't think we will have to do really a lot with audio when working on an Apex application. But, well, I think maybe you could keep in mind that if you're making a tutorial or a webinar like this, maybe we should do it with subtitles in the near futures, to help all those people who have a problem with the hearing. People who are really depending on web accessibility are the people with a cognitive impairment, and that's about 16 million people in the US. The last group of people, it's almost 15% of the US, are the elderly people. People will get more and more impairments when they get older and are not quite familiar with the computer as maybe the younger people. And also those people are heavily depending on web accessibility. And last but not least, we have the people in a limited situation. And that's all of us, I think. You also have to add a text alternative for the image, describing the image. So, for example, if a screen reader is speaking up the screen, it can speak up the description on the image, so anyone with a visual impairment knows what's presented on the screen. So this is a whole list of rules you have to comply to have your web application accessible. Let's go back to the PowerPoint presentation. Just like I said a few minutes ago, the section 508, that's a list of all the guidelines to make your application accessible for people with an impairment. There is also a second guideline which is more globally used, and that's created by the WC3 consortium, and those are the people who invested the internet. To go one sheet back, one important thing I think we can keep in mind is the section 508 in the US is a little bit outdated. I think it's several years old, and as of 2015 there is a proposal to update the 508 section to comply to the global guidelines, the Web Content Accessibility Guideline 2.0, which is which is from the W3C consortium. So if you have now an application that's now 508 compliant, there will be a pretty big chance the application will not be compliant anymore in the near future, as soon as the proposal for update will be definite. And if we can go back to the website I just showed you, there is here a mapping with the WCH 2.0 criteria and the existing 508 criteria, and sometimes things are new. So the WCH 2.0 guidelines are much heavier than the currently 508 guidelines. I think that's something that you can keep in mind if you want to go working on web accessible applications. So for now I'm going to leave the section 508, mainly because, well, section 508 will be more or less the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines 2.0 in the near future. So let's talk about how those guidelines are working so we can make accessible application future-proof. If we have a look at the guidelines that are created by the W3C consortium, they've made a list of guidelines which are based on 4 principles. They have to be perceivable, so everybody can see it. They have to be operable, so everybody can work with it. It has to be understandable, and it has to be working with assistive technology. And those 4 principles are implemented by 12 guidelines. Every guideline has 1 or more success criteria, 61 in total. So, summarizing the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, there are quite some topics you have to comply on to make your application work with accessibility. One last thing to mention on the content accessibility guidelines is there are 3 levels: A, AA, and AAA, and the 508 guidelines will be transformed to the web content accessibility guidelines will be transformed to the AA. So if we want to have a look on what kind of topics we have to look at to make our application accessibility proof, we have to look at the WCHG-AA topics. Luckily, the W3C consortium has made a website with all the guidelines we have to follow to make our application web accessible. And this is something, if you want to make your application web accessible, you have to take a deep dive to, well, know all the guidelines and know what you have to comply on to make your accessibility work. So I show you here a screenshot, and I added a link to the website. And here we can see a guideline. For example, make all functionality available from keyboard. So it stands here. And this guideline is trapped by two major topics: the keyboard and no keyboard trap. And if you want to know more about the keyboard, we can click here, how to meet 211. And if you click on it, we go to the corresponding topic, and it says all functionality of content is operable through a keyboard interface without requiring specific timing for individual keystrokes, blah 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 blah. And if we want to know about how can we implement this rule, we can open this panel, and there are all kinds of tips on techniques how we can comply on this guideline. And if you have a look at this guideline, there are all kinds of lines with a prefix. It says H91, for example, and it says PDF3, and it says SL15. Well, it's maybe nice to mention that if we are talking about web accessibility guidelines, we're not only talking about web applications, but we're also talking about documents which are published on the internet, or Flash, or all kind of techniques that can be published on the internet. Well, if you want to know how to meet those guidelines, I already showed you the website. You can go to the left panel and you can create your own filter. And you can say, well, I want to comply on level AA. Let's go back. And I'm not using Silver, I'm not using Flash. I'm only using HTML, CSS, and ARIA. And well, I just want to do only the necessary. So I now created a filter to meet the web accessibility guidelines level AA for the technology HTML, CSS, and ARIA. And I only want to know the sufficient techniques. And this will create me a list with all the guidelines I have to go through to make the application accessible on the criteria that I just gave in. So that's quite helping. Well, I hope I'm not losing everybody already with all this kind of theory on web accessibility, because when I was looking at this, all these guidelines and all these techniques and all these rules, I was thinking by myself, oh my God, what I'm going through now, is this really all necessary? But luckily, the Oracle company is helping us a lot, and even Safra Katz, which is, I think, the president was a CEO at the moment, well, did a quote on how Oracle is committed to make all the applications that they are selling being accessible for people with an impairment. So that's nice. So Oracle is helping us a lot, and they have people working on all the web content accessibility guidelines. And even Joe Kalman, who is the product manager of Apex, has a quote saying, well, also we have a deep focus on the web content accessibility guidelines and even the section 508. So that was giving me a little bit more hope to make an application web accessible, not knowing that I do not have to go through all these guidelines for myself if I want to make my application work with people with an impairment. Guidelines and the 508, but PAT, there are some kind of issues listed. It's more or less a document explaining on how accessible the Apex application really is. And there are some bugs reported in that document, which are, well, I think we should mention them now because they were quite important. Well, for example, the inline date picker is not usable with a screen reader. So if you are have to comply on screen readers, well, we have to do an alternative for the date picker. And one other, I think, is really important. There is no declarative way of defining row headers. No, let's go back. Which is quite important because our application are working a lot with tables, and explaining how a table is structured to a screen reader is a very important thing, I think. So let's not go through all these bugs. I will give you the presentation will be published after the webinar is finished, so you can go through them after that. So,
Serge, we have a couple of questions in the queue. Is there a document that would describe what can be implemented and what cannot using Apex 5 with respect to 508 in the guidelines?
Yes, that's the VPAT document that I was showing here. If you are applied to exclude these issues, you're relatively safe on being web accessible. And the major concerns how you can break the Apex accessibility will be mentioned in a few sheets later. So we come back to that later.
Very good. How about are there examples of any websites that already follow the web accessibility guidelines?
Well, we can go through this one. This one is definitely going to be web accessible because it's from the W3 consortium. Great. But also I'm going to give some examples on websites who can work with accessibility in a few sheets later.
Very good. Would you copy paste that URL, put it in the chat?
Yeah. This one?
Correct.
Or the one?
No, that one. That one. Yeah.
So, enough of the boring theory and all the guidelines and all the rules. It's not the most exciting topic to talk about, but I think it's important to get a better contrast on, well, what's the topic accessibility really meaning. I think I'm quite interested. Other people who already have seen somebody work with a screen reader? Don't get any people, so don't know. Well, I've constructed a short demo of a JAWS screen reader, just to get a kind of mindset on, well, how does someone who has no vision and have to depend on assistive technology work with an Apex application. So let me start the video, and I will do some short breaks to do some extra explanation on what's actually happening with the screen reader. So let me go back.
Alt-D, address and search using ex.oracle.com/ex.http://apex.oracle.enter. Zogan, demo accessibility -login, login username edit, type in text. SAART-AOFDING period L. Tab, login password edit, type in text. Star. Tab, login button. Enter.
So I'm just pausing the video now. Maybe nice to mention, when I was working on web accessibility, I did the course on web accessibility, and there was actually someone who was really blind and who was working with the JAWS for his whole life. And I was really flabbergasted because, well, the audio, the guy who's speaking now on the screen reader, I think on my live demo, the guy who was speaking on the JAWS screen reader was speaking, I think, 5 times as fast. It was blah, 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 blah. And I really could not understand how the guy who was blind could even know for a bit what the JAWS screen reader was speaking. As you can also mention, sometimes there is a beep when the cursor is focused on a form. It will come back later in the video, but that's something that's important to understand to know how a screen reader works. We'll come back to that later.
Home, demo accessibility navigation region. Demo accessibility navigation region. Page has 3 regions, 1 heading and 2 links. Home banner unlabeled, 1 button expanded. Link demo accessibility list of 1 items, logout button list and banner and demo accessibility navigation region, preview item selected.
So just going to pause it again. As you can see, if you open a page with a screen reader, the screen reader will gonna speak out the whole page automatically. And I think one of the first things, someone who is used to work with a screen reader will stop the screen reader because that's way too much information, and will go navigate through the screen. So it will stop the screen reader with speaking up or speaking up the whole screen, and will start navigate through the screen manually.
Oh, accessibility navigation region end list of 1 items, home list end group start welcome. Home. Heading list dialog. Headings list view. Welcome : 2, 1 of 1. To move to items, use the arrow keys. Escape blank home.
So what I was just saying, JAWS of every screen reader will speak out the whole page, will start reading the whole page as soon as the page is opened. Normally, someone will stop the screen reader and will navigate through the page manually. And normally what he will do is use something that's called the virtual cursor. And the virtual cursor is a specific combination of keys on the keyboard on which he can navigate through the screen and let the screen reader speak out every element on which the virtual cursor is on. Not to compare with the normal cursor. Normal cursor is almost, well, you can only have on a form field on which you can type or is. But the virtual cursor is something you can, well, navigate through the page without having the real cursor being on a form element. Well, maybe not really clear, but if you see this demo, it will be hopefully a bit more clear.
Banner. Unlabeled one button expanded. Link demo accessibility. List of one items. Logout button. List end. Banner end. Demo accessibility navigation region. Tree view item selected, 1 of 3. Demo accessibility navigation region end. List of one items. Home. List end. Blank. Group start welcome. Heading level 2 welcome. Blank. Welcome to my Apex-accessibility demo application. THS application shows some examples on how accessibility works in Oracle Application Express.
So what I did in this portion of the movie, I used the virtual cursor to navigate through all the elements on the page. And on JAWS, that's the insert key. And if you use the insert key, well, you can go from the first element, which is the collapsible icon, to collapse and expand the menu, go through the link, which is the page title, go through the logout item, go to the menu, navigation menu, go to the breadcrumb, go to the region header, go to the region content, and go to the first button. So that's the way many people who are not familiar with a web application and work on it for the first time will go through to investigate, well, what is the page like which I'm working on.
Blank. Go to first example button. Enter. Employees 7698. Page has 3 regions, 2 headings and 17 links. Employees banner unlabeled one button expanded. Link demo accessibility. Select a table dialog. List 1 list view. Employees 10x15. 1 of.
So next to the virtual cursor, which you can investigate, well, on how does the page look like. I think there are about 300 shortcuts in a screen reader to list up all kinds of features. So, for example, there is a specific shortcut to get all the tables who are shown on a page, and there is a different shortcut to get all the buttons, and there is another shortcut to get all the links. So in this way, the web application or the page, to be more precise, can be investigated on different dimensions.
To move to items, use the arrow keys. Enter table with 10 columns and 15 rows. Employees, column 1, row 1. Edit. Link graphic I/E2, row 2. Empno 7839, column 2. Enum King, column 3. Blake, row 3. Clark, row 4. Jones, row 5. Scott, row 6.
So this is a perfect example for the virtual cursor again. This time I'm using specific keys on the keyboard to navigate through the table, which normally cannot be done because if you want, well, the columns well, the cells in the table are not keyboard navigable. So, well, to make it happen that you can navigate through the keyboard, but through the screen reader has invented the virtual cursor.
No, 7788, column 2. Edit, link graphic I/E2, column 1. Links list dialog, links list view, I/E2, 6 of 17.
So here we have a list of all the links. That's another shortcut. And this is, well, something interesting what we see. Well, what we see on the screen is a report with a link to a form. To be more exactly, we have a report on all the employees, and if we push or click on the icon here or one of the other rows, we start the detail form, being able to edit the employee details. But for someone who is working with screen reader, this is not really going to be really handy to know which link he has to choose to change the values, for example, the fourth employee. So this is something we have to keep in mind when we work with links, that they are all discriminative enough. And I'll show you later how we can fix that.
Move to items, use the arrow keys. I/E2, row 4, I/E2 visited link graphic. Enter. Details of employee dialog, I/E2 visited link graphic, out of table. Tab, details of employee, no left parent value required, right parent edit required, 7782, type and text. Tab, details of employee, edit, Clark, type and text. End. X. Tab, details of employee, job edit, manager, type and text. Select a button dialog, list 1, list view, unlabeled 1 button, 1 of 8. To move to items, use the arrow.
So this is another shortcut to select all the buttons on the page. And this is quite, well, this is going quite good. All the buttons have labels, so it's saying details of employee, apply change button. Well, I think that's good enough for someone who's working with a screen reader to know what that button is doing. Especially, except the first button, unlabeled 1 button. And well, what button would that be? Well, I can show you. That is the button here on the left to collapse or expand the navigation menu. And I think that's something that will be fixed. I hope, in well, the next upcoming release of the Universal Team.
Log out button. Employees create button. Close button. Details of employee pop-up calendar : here date button. Details of employee cancel button. Details of employee delete button. Details of employee apply changes button. Enter edit manager. Details of employee job edit manager. Type and text. Enter. Table column 1 row 4 I/E2 visited link graphic. Link page has 3 regions, 3 headings and 17 links. Heading level 2 action processed. Close notification button group start.
So far a short demo of a JAWS screen reader. For me, it was when I saw it for the first time, someone who, well, works with a screen reader on a day-to-day life, it was really mind-blowing. Well, I hope for you it will give you some more insight on how important it is that all the elements on the web application have a good description. So someone who works with all the pop-ups from listing all the buttons and listing all the links knows which element to choose. So if we have a look at the video and have a look at the Apex and especially the Universal Team, I think we are, well, with this simple report on a form on a report, I think it was quite good working. So I think we can say that as long we use Apex out of the box, except for the button that I showed on the upper left corner for expanding and collapsing the menu, and for the links on the report, the screen reader was, well, not giving any wrong information. So as long as we use Apex out of the box, we are relatively safe on that the screen reader will work with the application. So I'm going to skip this one because we are getting a little bit ahead on time.
Pardon me, Serge.
Yeah.
Have you, you know, I've been looking for some tools. There's been questions about tools, to test for 508 compatibility compliance. And there's a couple tools out there, and there's a page with a list, which I've chatted out to everybody. So I hope you help everybody seeing the chats that are being posted. So there's some good stuff there. Sergey, the question to you is, do you favor one tool over another for testing for 508 compliance?
No, I do not. What I really what I do depend on is what I do, on every page that I'm building now is I always check the accessibility functionality of the Chrome web browser. So I can show you it's something that let me see if I think everybody knows the Chrome browser. It has a developer option. It's now saying in Dutch, but this is in English. It says inspect. If we click on it, and there is a little tab that's called audits. And if I check on accessibility and I do run, it gives me quite a good perspective on what's really wrong on accessibility on the page. And that's something, on which I heavily depend on. All the other websites that I know of for 508 compliance are not really working for a web application, but more working for a website. But that's something that I am, well, that's my perspective.
That's a fantastic tip, Serge. Thank you very much.
So, any other questions, Dave?
We've caught up, Sergey. Thanks.
Okay. So what we could see if we just we use Apex out of the box, we are relatively safe to be accessible and comply on the 508 standards and comply on the WCH 2.0 standards. But when do we need caution? Well, especially when we are going to use plugins. The Apex community builds a lot of plugins, but I don't think there is any plugin which is tested on accessibility. Another important thing is which you have to keep in mind as soon as you're using PL/SQL region, on which you are working with HTTP.p, well, you can make the most fantastic HTML and JavaScript features, but you will not be working in Apex anymore. So in that case, you will have to be cautious to stay compliant. So next, there are also a lot of some other places in Apex. Well, for example, dynamic action with an execute JavaScript code. I think that's also an option that makes Apex really agile, and you can tweak it on all kind of features to make it work just exactly the way you want to. But you won't be using Apex out of the box anymore. And if you are going to write your own JavaScript, well, caution is needed to stay compliant. region header and footer text, item pre and post text, link text, and HTML expression report columns are, well, are regions in Apex, places in Apex, on which you, if you are going to work on those specific items, well, good chance you are going to put in your own HTML on it. And I will explain, I'll show you an example soon. And also then there has to be some caution that you make your HTML accessible. So let's have a look on all the guidelines, the whole big list that I already showed you in the beginning. What is the #1 mistake to do and break the accessibility? Well, if you make something non-HTML compliant, so it's not valid anymore. You can do that quite easily if you're working with SQL dynamic content. In this case, the link is not closed. Well, many browsers will understand the link text has to be closed with an anchor element. But I don't think you can depend on the screen reader fixing this problem for you. I think #2 is, and this is something the Apex theme ruler really works, is if you're going to work with the wrong color contrast. I don't know if it's clear enough, but you can see here a little exclamation mark, and this is saying that the combination of this blue and this white will not meet the WCH 2.0 accessibility guidelines. So if you are going to play with the theme roller, please keep in mind that these exclamation marks will not appear. Another big issue is if we are going to, well, I'm going to say it as leaving the normal HTML structure. And what I mean is, well, in this example, I give you the code of a container div, and I want to make it clickable. Well, normally if I want to make something clickable, I will use a link, but I want to be stubborn, and now I've created a container div, and I added some little piece of JavaScript code on it, which says if I click with the mouse on it, it says clicked. Well, that's nice. That will work for a lot of people, but not people who are depending on the keyboard navigable. And if you want to fix that, well, you can add an element which is called tab index to make an element which is normally not keyboard navigable to make it navigable. I don't think this is a recommended structure to use to make things clickable. One of the biggest things I can say to keep web accessible is use the HTML structure as it is invented the way as much as possible. So what I mean is, if you want to display a header, use an H1 element, and if you want to make a clickable element, use a link or a button. And that's if you try to keep as close as much to this kind of mindset, you will make as less possible mistakes on accessibility. But nowadays, a lot of items has to be nicely need to have a nice layout, and a lot of times elements are used like divs or spans to create a better UI interface, but lose features on accessibility. Another thing is if we, and this is something that's, well, I see myself do quite much, is presenting colors to show some information. And that's, well, for people who are colorblinded or have a poor sight, those people cannot use colors to interpret information. So every time if you want to expose information with a color, you also have to do it with another thing like a text or an icon, something like that. And an example here is, well, here I have a list of all the employees, and I say green are active employees, and red are not active employees. Well, someone who is has an impairment on vision maybe cannot see the difference between red and green, and will not know which employee is active and which one is not. So if you want to work with those colors, we have to keep in mind, and this is the solution here, we have to add an extra column to present the information, and well, I'm going to have an error in the sheet I see, to make it presentable for people who are, well, just looking at the screen on black and white. And this is a little bit more complex. This is when you work with fonts and icons, and what I'm showing here is a report with a column that's saying gender. And how have I done that? Well, and here I'm going to talk about the HTML expression. Well, I have a column in the table employee, which says gender, and in the gender column it has two possible values, which has male or female. And if I use the HTML expression span class t icon fa, and I do then and I place the placeholder for the column gender, it will render fa minus male for rows which have the value of male in the database, and it will render fa minus female for rows which have female in the database. And that's presenting quite nicely for someone who is not working on accessibility technology. Well, sees a guy or a female showing up in a column, but someone who is working with a screen reader really has a problem, because how is the icon working? Well, the icon has no description for the screen reader, so the screen reader cannot speak out what's the value of a male or female. Now, how can we fix that? We can fix it to add an extra element, and this is going to be quite heavy, maybe for some people who are not really used to work with HTML. But we're going to add an extra element only for the screen reader, so it says Apex screen reader only, and we're going to put there the real value in the database. And why has it the class Apex screen reader only? We're going to hide it from the screen. So what we do, we make it 1 pixel big, and we put it somewhere in the left corner of the screen, so someone with normal vision would not see the element, but the element will be existing on the screen, so the screen reader will speak up the element, and in that case the screen reader knows what value in this column is put. On the other hand, we have here another attribute which is saying area hidden is true. And why do we put this one? Well, we want to hide the actual icon from the screen reader, because if you have a better look at how Font Awesome creates the icons, it's with a CSS post selector with a specific content, and that's great to make icons because you can make them. They are actually a web font, so they are scalable, very, very good. But a screen reader will not know how to speak up the content of a Font Awesome icon. So what we do, we hide the actual Font Awesome icon from the screen reader, and we add a new element for the screen reader, which is hidden from the screen. This is a little bit advanced web accessibility, but I think it's, well, an important one.
Pardon me, Serge. Have you seen any sample apps or demo apps that the students could download and inspect that are, of course, are 508 compliant?
Can you repeat the question, Dave?
Sure. Have you come across any sample applications that are 508 compliant that the students could get their hands on and inspect?
Yeah, this is something that I'm going to show you in a few minutes. That's an application which is called the best practices. Before we go there, I want to speak 1 minute over the way area. What I just was talking about was an element here that's called area hidden, and that's a specific attribute to speak to the to the screen reader. Well, don't speak up this element. So it's a little bit as a pseudo language just for the screen reader or all other assistive technologies. And this specific language, which is included in the HTML language, is called way area, and which is also defined by the W3C. And it's an upcoming language which is getting more and more important, especially because we are making applications which are going to be more and more interactive. So there is really getting a more and more need to give specific instructions to the screen reader. Well, this is the website. It's some way the same like the WCH accessibility guidelines. Well, I would not recommend you to go through it, but I just wanted to include it so to be complete. Some area labels that are going to be, well, if you're going to get inspecting elements on your web application, especially the universal theme, you will see some area elements again and again. And one of I already showed is the area label, which is saying to the screen reader, this is the label that you have to speak out if you're on that element. So let me go back. No, I didn't that. Sorry. Area labeled by is not a string to say to the screen reader what's the label is, but it's a reference to an ID of an element, and to hope that the other element has a good descriptive text that the screen reader can speak out. Area hidden is something that you want to say to the screen reader, well, don't speak up this element. So we had that one in the previous example. Area hidden is true. And area live is an important something, and that's quite good incorporated in Apex. If you are having dynamically content, so if you are updating a region or something like that, you say to the screen reader, well, if this region is updated, please speak up the changes. Because normally a screen reader will interpret the page once, and after he's done interpreting the page, any update on the page will not be spoken unless you add an area live element on an attribute. In that case, you can say to the screen reader, if this element or transcending elements are updated, please speak up the changes. So we're going through, it's already 9:10, so I think we can best go through the best practices if you want to use the 508 compliance and the way area. And one of the websites that really helped me a lot is the Open Ajax Accessibility website. This is a website with all kinds of examples on how to create complex user interface components. Why I say complex, because if you are going to use normal interface components like just a link or just a button, I think you can be pretty sure to be accessible and could be 508 compliant. And if you're using Apex out of the box, I think you can depend quite a lot on being 508 or Accessibile compliant. But if you are going to work with all kind of complex UI interfaces, especially if you want to make your own plugin or something like that, well, I would really advise to have a look on this page, this application. Well, there will be a big chance there will be an example for something that you want to build, and you can, well, copy a lot of logic from this application to be sure being web accessible. So, for example, if you want to make a progress bar, oh, this is an alert box. Let me go back. Oh yeah, this is someone quite nice drag and drop. Well, if you want to make your own drag and drop accessible, I think you are going to be specialized in accessibility. But what they have done here is add the HTML source, add the CSS code, and add the JavaScript code. And this JavaScript is quite nice documented, explaining how you can make a drag and drop accessible for assistive technology. Go back. The W3C consortium has a familiar website, also with all kind of best practices. Also a good place to reference if you want to make your own components. Are there any questions?
Yes, Sergey, thank you. I've been answering some as we go along, some things like tools. So I hope everybody's been seeing the chat window go by, because there's been some great questions coming in, and I've been trying to answer some as we go along. So the demo Apex app, is there a demo Apex app that we can provide or is available that's 508 compliant?
Not I know of. No, because
excuse me. Excuse me. What about my ed plan?
Well, it's audited at the moment, Dave. So it hopefully will be compliant, and that's something that I really would advise. If you really want to be 508 compliant, let's have a visual impaired user who works with a screen reader test your application, and have another company, have a specialist look at your application if you want to be 100% sure to be, well, maybe not 508 compliant, but to be WCH 2.0 compliant. Is that
great? And of course, I mentioned my ed plan. Of course, my ed plan is proprietary, so we can't quite. That was a silly comment on my part. Very good. Let me see. There's some other questions out here. Let me get back to it. We are going to post the presentation, and we'll send all of you participants a link to it so you can download it. I've actually recorded the session here, and if the recording works, I will post it as a tutorial, and I'll send you the link to the tutorial. I have to warn you that sometimes the software, the GoToMeeting, doesn't work perfectly. Go figure. But if it works right, you'll also have the presentation to review at any time you wish. So I think that's all the questions that we had, Sergey. So I think we've answered all. So students, if you've got additional questions, please get them in there now.
Yeah, maybe a final tip on being, well, in ieder geval a little bit more accessible. If you are working on a form on a table, just like here, just I was showing on the screen reader, if you, maybe you can remember, if I showed up all the links, it was saying e/forward2, which was presenting all these links. Well, that's mainly because if you are in, and I'm now opening the builder. Normally I don't do that on a webinar. But there is a item which is called, this is the row ID, this is the link column. And if you see here, there is no alternative text, so it will show the name of the image. But if you just add an alt attribute saying, for example, edit something like e-name, the screen reader will speak up on every link the name of the employee, which will be much more helpful for someone who is working with assistive technology. It's a final tip that I wanted to show, Dave.
Excellent. Sergey, would you do me a favor and go back to your, you're in your browser, would you show apex.world? I want to give a quick plug to this new website that maybe not all of our participants are aware of. Just apex.world.
Okay.
I'd like to show the students that. Yeah. So everyone, if you haven't seen apex.world yet, it's something you definitely want to bookmark and visit on a regular basis. You can see it's got a feed from Twitter, that everything that has to do with Oracle Apex. It's got news that's put into Apex, obviously Apex related news, big announcements, that sort of thing. And there's also a Slack feed. So this is a really well managed Apex site, and it's a good place to seek resources, find information. You can see there's a section for beginners up at the top there. There's also a section for job postings and trainings. So if you're looking for additional training for yourself or your colleagues, there's all sorts of stuff. And there's Apex meetings up there, new plugins. So there's all sorts of good stuff. And if I could ask you, sir, to go to the Skill Builders website. And here's our website. And if you just click on the Apex tab at the top there, you can see all of the things that we have to offer with respect to Apex, training, consulting, plugins, a lot of free plugins out there, good stuff. And one last Apex related thing that might be helpful, if you hover over the Oracle database to the right, yep, that one there, and you see a lotto down there at the right bottom. If you click on a lotto for me, please. So we built an administration application called a lotto. It stands for a lightweight administration tool for the Oracle database. And it does things like allows you to schedule backups, schedule Apex application and workspace backups or exports. Think about that. Scheduling nightly application and workspace backups, very cool stuff. And a lot of other DBA stuff like cloning databases you can schedule. So it's got a lot of good stuff. If you run it on Oracle XE, it is completely free. And you can purchase it for SE or XE. So that's it from me. Serg, any last thoughts from you?
No, not really.
Okay.
I want to thank everybody for attending the webinar. And if you have any questions, don't be shy to email me on the Skill Builders email. I will try to answer you as quickly as possible. I don't know if my email is provided, Dave.
It's in their chat window now. Sergey@skillbuilders.com.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
So they've got it now. My email is simply dave@skillbuilders.com. You guys all get it probably on a regular basis because I send you emails all the time. Probably sick of getting emails from me, but Sergey would be happy to answer your questions related to this. So thank you. I'll echo Sergey here. Thank you all very much for attending today's session and for your contributions. It was some really good stuff. Hope everybody saw what went by in the chat. We will post the presentation, and we'll hopefully post a tutorial as well, a edited version of this session, which will include really, Sergey's knowledgeable stuff coming through and all of my bantering cut out. So you're welcome, Francesco. And you guys all have a great day. Thank you very much, Sergey. Great presentation. Everybody loved it. And bye for now.
Bye-bye.
Bye for now. Everybody have a good day.